We're in John chapter 2. And so we're beginning to talk about the wedding at Cana in Galilee. We're beginning to go there. So let me read John chapter 2. You have those in your notes. We'll break them down. But as always, I'll kind of read the whole passage, and then we will break this down. The next day, so this was after what we had seen. I guess it'll help from this. From last week, we kind of ended with Jesus declaring, or John declaring that he knew it was Jesus because he had seen the dove and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes the things that opens another person's eyes are going to be different than what opens ours. So we need to never diminish another person's experience. I told you that sometimes when I was a youth pastor, there was things that I kind of scoffed at, and I was like, that can't touch anybody, that's stupid. And the kids would be in the corner just bawling because they had been touched by something I thought was goofy. I learned way back then, don't call it goofy if it touches them. Just even if you think it's goofy, just like, yes, God's good, and just smile and nod, and it's all good. Never diminish another person's experience. We kind of ended there at the end of chapter 1. And then Jesus declared some truth that for those who believe. He said we will see greater things, which we spoke about just a second ago, sang about even. He said that we will see heaven open, and he said that then we will see Jesus. We will know him for who he really is. And so we ended there, and then in chapter 2, the next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Mary and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities. So Jesus' mother told him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, that's not our problem," Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." But his mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Gallons. I almost said Galileans. I don't know if that would have been a completely different sized jar. Gallons. Jesus told the servants, "Fill the jars with water." When the jars had been filled, he said, "Now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies." So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. "A host always serves the best wine first," he said. "Then when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine, but you have kept the best until now." That's a hard children's church lesson right there, just letting you know. Yeah, there you go. That's a difficult, all right, kids. All right, but anyhow, where are we? And about Solomon's multiple wives. There's just it's a need-to-know basis. They don't need to know that right now. All right. This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. After the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. It was nearly the time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. That does make a great children's church message. They love that one. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, I think of other stuff in the middle of reading here. He sold doves. He told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the Scriptures. "Passion for God's house will consume me." But the Jewish leaders demanded, "What are you doing? If God gave you the authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it." "All right," Jesus replied, "destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." "What?" they exclaimed. There you go. I don't know whose phone that is, but there you go. Jesus called. "What?" they exclaimed. "It's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days." But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the Scriptures and what Jesus had said. Finally, almost done. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, there's some signs there it doesn't actually tell us about. I don't know what they are, but all the miraculous signs they did there at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. You'll see greater things. You will see heaven open. You will see Jesus. It ended with talking about the stairway to heaven, not the song, but Jesus talking about being the way to heaven. So, John chapter 2, right after that, starts with these first few verses. We'll read it again. The next day, after the encounter with John, after the encounter being baptized, after the encounter where John pointed at Jesus and said, that's the one, and Andrew left, and they left. They got Peter, they got other people, and they began to leave, and they began to follow after Jesus. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, they have no more wine. Dear woman, that's not our problem. Which I just want to stop right there, and the New Living Translation puts that a whole lot nicer than the other translations. The King James, the English Standard, some of the other ones, we have no more wine, and Jesus looks at his mother and says, woman? Now, I want to remind you, that could be a good children's church lesson right there. Never do this, kids. Don't do this. We follow after Jesus' steps in every single spot until he says, woman, to his mother. Do not do that. Okay? Life lesson there, kids. All right, very good. So, anyhow, dear woman, the New Living Translation, because the translators are like, surely not. Let's not even worry about the Greek on that one. Surely not. That was somebody had a bad day or something. I was thinking about their own mom or something. That's not our problem. Jesus replied, my time has not yet come. That part's good. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. All right, here we go. Let's just get in and just break. I got a few points on each passage, about 4 different passages. We're going to break this down. Then we'll take communion and we'll pray tonight, and it's going to be good. It's going to be a good time. I want you to know, and I put it in your notes just so you wouldn't worry about it or shouldn't whatever. The main point of this story is not about alcohol. This is not, okay, we use this, we talk about this a whole lot, and people bring out stuff for and against, all that kind of stuff. I don't care about any of that right now. I'll just tell you the main point of this story is not about alcohol, even if you're having a discussion on alcohol and Christians drinking or not drinking or whatever, but it's not about alcohol, but it is about honor and it is about glory. The main part of this story, the reason it was written down, is about honor and glory. It's not even about the miracle. It's not even about that. It's about honor and glory. And the reason I know it's not about a miracle is because later on it said all the miracles that Jesus did during the Passover celebration, but John doesn't care about listing them. He doesn't care one bit about writing down everything. Do you know that Jesus did a lot of stuff that we don't know about? There were times, and it's weird, I don't really understand all of it, but there's times where Jesus would do something and tell his disciples, stop, don't tell anybody. Part of it very well could have been is that everywhere we went, he got like 5,000 people around him, and he didn't want 10,000 probably. I don't know. That may have been. But there were other reasons. But it wasn't even about the miracles, because the Bible actually says that even if all the books in the world could hold it, everything that was written, if everything that Jesus did was written, then all the world could not contain all the books. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So it's not really about all the things. And we look down and we try to find a scripture and verse. Well, did Jesus do it that way or this way or whatever? It's not really about that. The story is not about alcohol. It's not about miracles. It's not even about the wedding. It is about honor and it is about glory. We see this over and over again in the book of John. But it's about honor and it is about glory. Look at the beginning of the story. Jesus showed honor because the reason, that bullet point there, Jesus was involved in the lives of others. I think that's Jesus was involved in the lives of others. He honored people by being around them. I mean, this is Jesus. He is God. He didn't have to spend a lot of time with other people. Listen, the neat thing about this story, and I really just the last time I was kind of reading it to kind of prepare for tonight, it's the first time it ever hit me. This was really before Jesus' major ministry stuff. It was before he was feeding the 5,000. It was before he was walking on the water. It was before all that kind of stuff. But Jesus went to this wedding. Jesus was God, and he could have been aloof enough to not have anything to do with the people around him in Galilee. The Galileans were kind of looked at as people who weren't really the upper echelons, probably the nicest way to put it. I mean, they had a distinct accent that they would have that other people could know. It's the equivalent. Well, I was going to say it's the equivalent of like Tennessee and Alabama, but I don't want to make Galilee look bad by comparing it to Alabama. But anyhow, no, sorry. If you're from Alabama, we love Alabama. We love being right in the middle of Alabama. That way, no matter which way you're going, you're headed out of it. So there you go. All right, Alabama jokes all night long. Here we go. Listen, it's a funny joke, James. It's a great joke, and I'm being silly. We love Alabama. But listen, here's the deal. James is not from Alabama, so nobody worry. But anyhow, they had different accents. They had distinct things about them. It wasn't the place where everybody went, oh, you're from Galilee. You're from that area. They did. It was a tight place. Again, not necessarily Galilee, but the northern region, any of that up there. It's like Nazareth, that's not really a great place. And all kinds of stuff that would happen up in there. But the idea is that he was God. He didn't have to, God didn't have to come to earth. Jesus didn't really have to spend a lot of time. Cana of Galilee, I don't really know how big it was at the time, but it was a community that was there. And it was in Cana of Galilee, actually not the place where he spent a lot of time. He lived in Capernaum a lot of time, and there was a reason why he was around that area after his ministry had started. But he wasn't really in Cana of Galilee because he lived in Cana of Galilee. This was before Jesus' ministry, so it wasn't, oh, hey, look, there's Jesus, the one who walks on water. There's Jesus, the one who heals the blind. You know what I get out of this that I've never gotten out of it before now? This was Jesus who spent time getting to know people. He was involved in the life of people. He didn't have to be. He wasn't famous at this point. He was Jesus. He was Mary's son. His brothers were with him who later on said, he must be crazy because he's our brother. Now, they didn't say that exactly, but they look, who do you think you are? And he's like, well, I'm Jesus. I'm the Messiah. And they're like, yeah, you're our brother. And he had some problems with it. It's with the famous passage where he says, you're my brothers and you're my sisters and you're my family now, he said to the disciples, knowing that his own family, maybe even they turned away, that his bond with the people who followed him and believed him were greater than even the people that he was connected to on a family level through his mom. And so anyhow, we had him there with, he was Mary's. At this point, he was still Joseph's son. I mean, Joseph had not written there, but that's how people knew him. And he had spent time involved in the life of other people. If you want to have influence with other people, we talked about that for a long time, but if you want to be able to be put into the position to where you can speak life over someone or you can do something in the name of Jesus that will change their life, you have to have invested in them first in order for them to invite you into their presence. And so maybe I took way too much out of that, but for the first time when I was reading this again, I thought, wow, Jesus spent time with people. But before he was doing his Jesus thing. He just spent time with people because he liked them. Not because he was trying to save them, but he liked them. Jesus was involved in the lives of others. He wasn't too big for where he lived. And that's big. If Jesus can do that, we can too. And here's the other thing that I get out of this, about this all being about honor and glory, the whole thing we'll talk about. But we must learn to see beyond what others see. We must learn to see as Christians beyond what others see. I mentioned the passage in Ezekiel when the world and even Ezekiel in the moment saw dry bones and God asked him to speak something different over what he saw. We got to be able to see beyond what others see. No miracles, I mentioned before, have been performed by Jesus. That's recorded. No miracles that were there that we know of. But Mary knew who her son was. Everybody else was just kind of figuring it out, maybe. Even the disciples, they were going on the word of John. But Mary knew who her son was. She knew that there was a problem and that the one who was responsible for all creation could solve it. That's what she knew. She knew who was there, and there's a problem. Well, this is God. So let's see what God does. And you've got to be able to see beyond what everybody else sees. Do you understand? There was no chapter and verse that said that Jesus had the power to do anything about a drink selection at a wedding. There was nothing. There was absolutely nothing where you could look down in the first book of whoever and find, oh, wait, okay, Jesus is able to take water and turn it to wine. That wine, he's able to do this. Okay, good. Now, Jesus, this is what your word says, and you do it. It wasn't about a chapter and verse. She only understood that he was present, that he was there. And there's sometimes we limit ourselves and limit God to what we've just read about or heard about, and all we really need to know is that God is here. And if God is here, then whatever the problem we got is smaller than God, that God trumps that problem. Now, we don't know how he's going to do it, and we know what he's going to do sometimes, but we know that God is bigger than the problem, and so we begin to understand that he's present. The other thing that messes with me here, and it's maybe not a real biblical thing, I guess, but I have no idea why Mary was in charge. I have no idea why Mary was telling the servants what to do. I have no idea. Maybe, she just happened to be, maybe she was bossy. I have no, all the pictures show Mary, she's real meek and mild. Maybe she was bossy. I don't know. She starts bossing people around here and telling them what to do, but even the servants listen to her. Do what he says. He's like, what? The servants are walking, wait a minute, I don't think we work for you. And Mary's like, just do it. Yes, ma'am. And then they go, and so that's what happens, all right? And even Jesus, my time's not yet come. Do it. She gave him the look. My boys still, they can't get the look. I'm still like, make noises and stuff to them, and I look at them and they're like, what? That's it. Jesus, he said, woman. So maybe that was it. He was like, what? Get off my back, Mom. I don't know what it was. Hey, he was just as human as he was God. It's weird. I don't know, but there you go. And so Jesus listened to Mary. The servants listened to Mary. I have no idea. There's no real biblical application to that, but it's just kind of weird to me. And so I just begin to look at that. So who knows? So then verse 6. Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars. 6 stone water jars that were used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. When the jars have been filled, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. This may not be a revelation to you, but they weren't out of water. They were out of wine. Okay? They weren't out of water. They were out of wine. And that line there, the purpose of a miracle is to correct a lack, not to accomplish what you can do for yourself. It's not a miracle that you drive up to the window at McDonald's and they hand you a quarter pounder. It's a New Testament miracle if it doesn't have cheese on it and you ask them for no cheese. But that's a New Testament miracle. But it's not a miracle. You can do that for yourself. It's not a miracle for some of the things you can do for yourself. The purpose of a miracle is to correct a lack. They had water, they didn't have wine, not to accomplish what you can do for yourself. Here's the other thing that I get out of this. There are times that God creates something out of nothing. But there are other times where God changes what we have for his glory and for his pleasure. There are times God just can absolutely create something that wasn't there. And there's times that God can take something that is there and make it not be there. We've seen that happen, and God's removed tumors and cancer, and God's actually provided finances that weren't there, and all kinds of stuff. And so there's times where God creates something out of nothing, but there are other times when God changes what we have in our hand to use for his purpose and for his glory. It's the thing that we have in our hand. Sometimes we over-spiritualize some things. And this was a great miracle. But it's like, God, all I've got is these 3 things here. That's all. And God's like, well, I'll use them. I'll change them. But God, all I have is just job. All I have is this position. All I have is this much fine. All I have is this much. That's what God says, okay, I'll use that. And I'll do something incredible with it. And here's what I want you to know. That we've got to give up what is used for our purpose to receive what is for the purpose of the master. That sounds weird. But you have to give up what you use for your own purpose so that you can actually receive, that you can actually gain what is used for the purpose of the master. The jars and the water were there. It's kind of a weird thing that it says they were there for ceremonial cleaning. That's just kind of a weird thing. It was natural at the time to mix water and wine because the wine was it was thick. It was gritty. Just try to help you out at the time. The ancient Greeks used to do it. It was thick. It was gritty. It was too strong. So they would mix water and wine a lot of times. But they weren't mixing water and wine. They were taking these jars, which had absolutely nothing in it, which were used for another purpose altogether, and went somewhere else and got water and put the water into the jugs. That's what happened. And when I just kind of look at this, I think it's important that John said, the writer John here, not John the Baptist, but the writer John tells us they were used for ceremonial cleaning. And what I get out of that, and it's not in your notes, but it's just a thought, is that the religious ritual of the day, because they would use this to clean, they would pour water over their hands to wash. They would have to wash their feet. There was a big to-do to be able to be clean so that you could walk in and you could celebrate and you could do everything that you needed to do. And so they would use these for religious purposes and religious rituals, not really scriptural things, but religious things, and those are different. Sometimes they would take the fact that Jesus said, or that God said that you had to rest on the Sabbath, and then they would make up rules that said you can't tie certain things and you can't walk but certain many spaces, and they would do all the religious rituals, but it wasn't really scriptural. And the washing of the hands and all that kind of stuff, the ceremonial cleaning, wasn't really scriptural as much as it was religious. And what I see here is that Jesus was kind of making a statement, or at least I see a statement here, that the religious ritual of the day would have to take a back seat to the declaration of who Jesus was. Jesus was about to show up. He was about to demonstrate His glory, as we read in the passage. And any religious ritual that would get in His way was going to have to take a back seat. I can see a couple of the important people go, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? What are you doing? We got to use those for cleaning." And Jesus is like, "Just fill them up." And the servants did it. Because anything else kind of has to take a back seat to the declaration of who Jesus is. It says in verse 9, when the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, it says, but he called the bridegroom over. A host always serves the best wine first. He said, then when everyone has a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. And that is what you think it is. When they're too drunk to know, they would bring out the stuff that was the dollar store brand. I don't know if the dollar store has that. I don't know. But you have kept the best. I don't think the one in Evansville does. But you have kept the best until now. The miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed His glory. And His disciples believed in Him. Notice in here, nowhere did Jesus announce really what He had done. We don't see a ta-da from Jesus. I would love that if Jesus did, hey, how about that? And start walking, just levitate a while or something. That would have been great for Jesus to do every once in a while, but He didn't do that. It says that it was the first time that Jesus revealed His glory. That's really the only part of this passage I just read, or not the only part, but the main part that I want to look at just here for 1 second. That word glory, that I actually looked it up. The first time Jesus revealed His glory. The glory here is based on both the presence of God and the opinion of God. The glory is based on both the presence of God and the opinion of God. I looked up the word glory, and the reason I got this, it was just weird. This is the first time He showed His glory, and I just was looking it up. I thought that's kind of interesting. That word would be used there. And the word for glory here, it actually comes from a word that means opinion. It means to make an opinion of something. In other words, just very basically, what does God think? And again, it just struck me that Jesus didn't say, ta-da, look what I did. The servants knew. He just said, take it to the master of ceremonies and see what happens. It wasn't about, hey, look, I did this. As a matter of fact, the story never records. They actually let everybody else in on the gag. They didn't let everybody else in, you're really drinking water and you just don't know it. Now, I don't know about all that. Nowhere in there does it say that they actually ever explain. But so the point was not what do these people think, but what does God think? When you look at the glory of God, when you look at Him demonstrating His glory, it wasn't that everyone in the world knew that Jesus was able to do this. It was that His Father in heaven had an opinion of Him. And sometimes when we do things, even good things for God, we get upset that we don't get the attaboys. We get upset that that everybody doesn't say, wow, man, that was just incredible. And really, in reality, we just need to be saying, God, what do you think about that? God, was that okay for you? If no one else ever knows it, I'm not saying that's an easy place to get to, because we all love our ego stroked. We all love someone saying good things about us. But to be able to just simply say, God, what glory is not about having your name in lights. Glory has to do with God's opinion of who you are. And the glory here is also something that shines through. Glory also means not just an opinion, but something that shines through, something that's illuminated, something that's magnified. It's kind of more along the lines of what we would think glory would be, something that literally shines through. And here's what I saw here. The miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed. It's interesting because that next line there, the miracle did not make Jesus great, but simply showed His greatness. It simply revealed who was already in the room. We think it's something new. And I would just remind you, God's here. And when we pray, and when we sing, and when we preach, and when we teach, and when we fellowship, and when we do all that, the goal is not to get God here. The goal is to reveal His glory. That our eyes are open, that we see that He is already in the room. I know that because it says at the end of that, and His disciples believed Him. As always, the miracle was not about the miracle. It was about His glory and His honor, and it was to point them to Jesus. Then verse 12 says they left the wedding. Then verse 13, it was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple, He saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip, which means this was not just a spur-of-the-moment time. He took time to make a whip. I don't want to mess up our theology on He just kind of picked up something. He made a whip from other ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers, coins on the floor. Mass hysteria. Get it out. You're turning my Father's house into a marketplace. I edited. This is a passage that shows the passion of Jesus, not the passion of the last week of Jesus, but shows His passion about the house of God. It shows His passion about the place where they're supposed to meet and they're supposed to worship God. However, it wasn't about a building, because we know through reading other things about Jesus and His conversations, namely the person with the woman at the well, that He said at some point it's not about where you worship or how you worship. Not this mountain, that mountain, this building, that building. It's not about all of that. That was Jesus' mentality, which was His Father's mentality. So it wasn't about the building. It wasn't about the building. But the actions, that first line there, of those in the temple mattered because of the intent of the heart. The actions of those in the temple mattered because of the intent of the heart. You see, we sometimes can read this, and I even heard it preached that justification can be used that, well, people had to travel far, and so they had to buy their animals there. Okay, and I don't know, maybe legitimate, I have no idea. However, the truth about the sacrifice to God is that God does not want just any sacrifice. He wants the best. And that's the next line. God doesn't want just any sacrifice. Let's go there. It's like, I'll have that sheep. Come on. It's the last one. It's Christmas shopping on December 24th at the Five and Dime, because you go in and it's like, I'll take that fragrance and here we go. And you just go, whatever. He doesn't just want any sacrifice. He wants the best. The other thing that and through reading the story and actually studying and those kind of things, the merchants were not there to help. You think, look, they're there to help. No, they weren't there to help. They were there to line their own pockets. That's what they were there to do. The reason I know this is that Jesus said, you're turning this into a marketplace. He didn't say you've turned this into a sacrifice ministry. It wasn't about ministry. They weren't doing what they were doing to be involved in ministry to help out worship. They had become a marketplace. It had become a business. And here's what you need to know about ministry. And this is the one way you can say, is that ministry or not? Ministry must always benefit another more than it benefits you. I know when you minister to people, it comes back. We use the terminology, I went there to bless them, but they blessed me. And all that's good. That's great terminology. Okay, I understand that. I'm not belittling that. But the purpose of the ministry is to minister to the others. Their purpose was to create a marketplace. And Jesus said, that's not what this place is about. So he got rid of them. And then the disciples remembered this prophecy from Scripture. Passion for God's house will consume me. But the Jewish leaders demanded, what are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it. All right, Jesus replied, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. They didn't like that one. What? It's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days? But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed both the Scriptures and what Jesus had said. Here's the first point there. Where your heart is will determine what you think about. Do you understand that Jesus turning over the tables was the exact same scenario that both the disciples and the Jewish leaders saw? They just saw it from different perspectives. They saw it from a different heart. And because their heart was different toward Jesus, they saw it in a completely different light. They both had different reactions. First bullet point there, if you go in ready to believe, you will be ready to see God's purposes. But if you go in ready to doubt, you will always look to demand more. If you go in ready to believe, you'll be ready to see God's purpose. But if you go in ready to doubt, you'll always look to demand more. I've seen people at conferences and sometimes people go and they're wide-eyed, man. They're ready, whatever. You go in there like, whatever God's going to do, I'm ready. I've been praying and fasting for the last 3 years, whatever. And so they go in and they're just ready to receive. And somebody's like, you know what? Jesus is Lord. And they're like, yeah! And they just jump up. That's the best I've ever heard. They're writing it down. Jesus is Lord. And we're like, yeah, we know that. That's good. Their hearts are ready. Their hearts are ready to receive. And so they receive. It doesn't take a lot to be able to get them going. Sometimes we get so calloused. It's not that we're ready to doubt, but sometimes we're like, yeah, I've heard all that before. Read the Bible a bunch of times myself, no big deal. Don't like to brag about it. I'm ready for it. I'm not real sure. I've been under the best preachers, not real sure that you can actually tell me anything I don't already know, but why don't you go ahead and try? And at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, that's all right. That was pretty good. But you should have exegeted the Greek term of this thing just a little bit better and the hermeneutic thing or whatever. And my eyes will start glazing over. If you talk to me like that, I'll just tell you that right now. I know what those words mean, but I don't want to know what those words mean, so I'll just glaze over. And sometimes we come in, and because we've been there and done that, because we know all the rules and all the regulations, we're waiting for something more. We're waiting for something big. It's really got to blow us out of the water. The disciples remembered, and they saw the situation, and they thought, hey, that points me to God. The religious leaders demanded more miracles to prove what they had already seen. That's the point. What's your attitude when you encounter God? What is your attitude when you come into the house of God? You see, God can get past our doubt, and He often does, and when we're sinners, He has to. In order to save us, He's got to get past that. But if we would come to God with an open heart, ready to receive what He has, I've been amazed sometimes I wonder sometimes at the revelation I have missed from a man or woman of God or from a place where God was speaking because I went in with doubt. God, how much have I missed because I wasn't ready to receive from you? So, that next line there, Jesus' answer to a demand was simply to point them to His purpose. That was what it was. They demanded more. He says, destroy this, it'll raise up. That was his purpose. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. I love that. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. We'll just finish with this. At some point, we must get beyond a demand for proof. God will give us things. He will give us miracles. He will give us all that to demonstrate his love for us. He will do stuff that is crazy, that doesn't even make sense, just to simply show us that he loves us. However, we cannot continue to live our lives always needing to see miracle after miracle. God will continue to give miracles. But we can't be 30 years, 20 years in this, 10 years in this, whatever many years in the faith, and still live our life here and here and here and here, and we only get up here when God tickles our fancy a little bit, and then the next day we're like, God, where have you been all my life? And we go back down the other. Sometimes we've got to grow out of that. We got to get beyond a demand for proof. And then the last line there, Jesus sees more than what we do. He sees who we are. Just that line there. Jesus knew all about him. You didn't have to explain the human heart to him. You may think that you are fooling all. And you may be here on earth. But you will never fool God. He knows just who you are. And the Bible tells us, even though he knows who you are, he still pursues you. And that's awesome. That's awesome. Can we take communion?